Category fit for Grammy like Soul Sports and competitors better look out like Pac-Jam once
Good morning. It's a frightening pleasure to be here. This is a fairly large crowd. I wasn't expecting to have this view from here. So just a disclaimer, any blunder on my side is just your fault. No, we got it clear. We're going to start. So let me provide you with, still moving? Should it move? Okay, here we are. So we understand academic health systems in the US are hubs of innovation. Now, it happens in a large systemic way. So I'm going to give you the perspective we have in the University of Utah about innovation. But I'll start with providing some background for this. The first thing is that there's an imperative for innovation. We need to innovate. And this, you already know this famous sentence from Einstein. What it says basically is that we need to acquire new knowledge every time, every day. It is, think of something really tiring. It's a hamster trail. It's working every day, acquiring new knowledge, because the previous knowledge is going to take us where we need to go next. So that is the first thing. So there's no option. We have to innovate. So I think of innovation perhaps as a curse. There is a curse from innovation, since, depending on your beliefs, we were expelled from paradise. We have been looking for something that decreases pain or allow us to decrease the amount of effort we allocate into things. So that is perhaps personified, at least I think, in the myth of Sisyphus. I don't know if I pronounce it correctly. I mean, this foreign language of yours is always tricky. So Sisyphus was this guy who was really cunning, really smart. He always was outsmarting the gods. He looks a bit like us, really clever, until one day the gods said, you know what, we are up to here with you. You're going to carry this rock up to this hill. It's going to come down, and you're going to have to take it back, down, take it back, and down. So the issue here is that if we are kind of in a Sisyphean trap, we always have to innovate. You remember what Einstein said, right? So we have every time new problems. Once we get there, guess what? There's no there. There's no end of the hill. So we're like Sisyphus, but our hill doesn't have an end. So think of it like every time we get to a point, we have a new energy that we have to put more energy into the system to defeat entropy. Otherwise, entropy is going to catch up with us. Now, that is perhaps a bad way of seeing it. But yesterday I realized, in this exercise we had yesterday about being lucky, not lucky, we had wonderful and powerful stories. And those stories were relevant because they were referred to us in ways we could comprehend. So this is, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, right? I'm Colombian, so I'm biased. But there's something here. This guy wrote, every book was about realism, magic realism, right? This one is not. This one is about telling his life to others. By the way, it's beautiful. You should read it if you haven't. So it's living to tell the tale. So yesterday we got stories. So what we see here is that every time we do something different to solve something, we become more human. That is the essence of being human. The other is that innovation, as we saw it yesterday, is about sharing. We share our stories. Then we have this story, and aha moment. So the other thing is that if you share this way, guess what? You're in a social act. Therefore, you like my syllogism so far? Innovation is a social act in itself. And it defines us as humans. Now, we get into this trap that the coolest, latest device is the one that defines innovation. Oh, this person is so creative. So there's a definition for technical innovation, technological, is doing things and new things, improvements of products. And perhaps you're familiar with this image. Everyone who was born after 1950 and between 1950 and 1985, 1990 were promised flying cars. Thank God they didn't arrive. Have you seen a traffic jam? So the other side of innovation, if we acknowledge this as a social act, you have this definition, which, by the way, This is the Oxford from Oxford side inside the school. That's why it's with an S, just to prove that I quoted the Brits, right? So it says that innovation is motivated by meeting social goals as opposed to business goals. I thought it was nuts, nonsensical, because at the end, we're always trying to solve a problem. This guy solved it. And you look at the other chimps around him. This is not a technical definition of innovation. This is close to a social act. So how does it happen at the University of Utah? Let me get there. Before we go there, we always think that innovation happens in a proverbial garage, person isolated, really brilliant. Nothing is around but just her intellect. Great, right? So let me give you examples. Television, the Zamboni machine, the artificial heart, the promise from eternal life. Frisbee, and the traffic light. What these things have in common? Can anyone tell me here? I didn't know either. So they all were invented in Utah. Right? Isn't it fantastic? Well, let me tell you, there's more to this. So the thing is that I had a problem with innovation because sometimes when you're trying to define it, you get into this thing. You remember who said that for another subject, right? So the thing is, what happens that is new that you recognize that is disruptive, new? It's totally new. So what happened so you have a cultural milieu, and then you have this institution that is about teaching in this very cultural milieu. So actually, these guys in Utah, they see that innovation is a great point that defines them as such. So the University of Utah happens there. So it was important that the first hair transplant, not just the first Jarvik heart, but also in the first biomedical informatics. As a matter of fact, the first electronic medical record was invented in Utah. Guess what year? 1958. We have been told that we needed computers, right? No, we needed someone who wanted to do something. So all this, I left the last one here because I like this idea that innovation happens in a social space. So guess what? The first institution in evaluating doctors in the open. Do you think doctors liked that? Of course, they didn't like it. But it happened. So you have to be disruptive, right? Is there a formula for innovation? According to Picasso, there's one. You break everything and you start anew. Actually, I don't think there's a formula per se, but there are certain things that happen in innovation. One is that, first of all, in spite of this idea of luck yesterday, you have to be intentional. You actually have to pursue for something. You have to look for it. You have to perhaps start creating areas in which you can share knowledge. SwitchPoint is a good point. I like that. Investing. You need to invest. This idea that if you have, do you remember, no effort, no gain? Guess what? It is true. It is damn true. You have to invest effort, knowledge. You have, the other thing is that you have to be ready to break with the mold that you have before. Embrace error, of course, sounds logical, but this one is getting ready to be surprised. Why? Because innovation does not necessarily happen in the place you were expecting it would happen. But you have to be ready for it, right? Now, you create an ecosystem that favors that. Here we have all these centers, every one of them in the University of Utah think they are innovating better than the others. But there's something that is happening here that is important, and something I forgot to mention. By the way, here, you see the technology and venture commercialization. Utahns have defined innovation in very interesting terms. If they cannot sell it, it doesn't count. It's as simple as that. So, an example of this, everything that is done is thinking in a perspective market utilization of it. So the P word, profit, is not a bad word for these guys. So they start putting together students, faculty, and trying to get new ideas for things. This is an example. Xenospec is something that replaces the colposcope at a much lower cost. It can be used everywhere. Kids got $10,000 to invest in this. The other thing that happens here in this space is what are the definitions of what we're good for? One thing that we realize is that we know how to manage data in large amounts. to produce the virtual cadaver, for instance. Or to come up with this formula in which, very simply, we say, the greater the quality, the lower the cost, the greater the value. Right? It's kind of the difference in or da. So the da moment is here. One other expression related to this is that how do you measure quality? Well, asking, right? You ask people, something really important in spite of everything that doctor said is that our dean said, well, quality is defined by, guess who? Clients. If you do well, you'll do well. So just how do we pair this information with others is, okay, we knew Utahns like to collect information. We collected a warehouse of costs. You saw that we had this idea of quality. Then we decided, how do we combine these two? What if we turn this into cost centers? And we arrived to this, I'm going to move quickly here, to this idea of measuring cost per procedure and tied it up with quality outcomes. And guess what happened between doctors? A miracle happened. They started sharing information. They say, how come you get this better outcome with less cost than I do? Isn't it powerful? Oh, believe me, it is. So, we are also, in our discussion, something important is how do we facilitate innovation. Something I wanted to share with you here is that there's a new laparoscope that is disposable. So you are familiar with these 5 points. Those are E.V. Rogers' framework for diffusion of innovation. Well, guess what? This kind of invention, that this disposable laparoscope, really tick every one of these boxes. But perhaps the most important thing is that we were able to replicate and share that in Mongolia. So the idea here was that the person was thinking of doing cholecystectomies with this disposable laparoscope. We were thinking family planning. If you're going to get rich with cholecystectomies, you're going to get filthy rich with family planning. So that space is something that this institution thinks as a possibility. So just as a conclusion for you, so the University of Utah has an intention about innovation. It does happen because there's an intention there. Now, the culture that appreciates innovation and ingenuity is a good fertile ground for this. Now, going back to our journey on innovation, it happens when we share. Remember? We have this syllogism. Now, social innovation is at the core of innovation. I don't believe that distinction. Actually, innovation happens as a social process. Then it is reflected in the cool things, 3Ms, all these things, but it's a social process. If you have the greatest idea and you don't share it, where is innovation? And something that I wanted to share, this is what I think is part of the journey. Innovation is in the essence of being human. We have to innovate or we will die. Entropy will catch up with us. And guess what I learned yesterday? Actually, the greatest force in the universe that is pushing us in this direction is perhaps love. We learned a lot about that yesterday. All these stories, I mean, the sharing, having something to tell us that makes us better and human, is perhaps in the nature of us being human. Thank you very much.
When tech